Welcome, folks. I hope that everybody's having a great Moby-Dick marathon, and obviously it's a little different this year, and the staff of the Whaling Museum pulled out all the stops to make certain that this program can be seen. If you were watching from the beginning, you could watch it straight through, and if you can check in at any time and see how we're going. I miss you all. For sure. Visualizing Melville, an exhibition of words, ideas, images, and objects by me, Michael P. Dyer, Maritime Curator, New Bedford Whaling Museum. Okay, so first off, this is a lightish presentation. It's supposed to be fun. It's not heavy scholarship, but it's not entirely frivolous either. There are some thought-provoking bits here that point to Moby-Dick as a 19th century document and what that means. For all of its timelessness, the words came out of a time when an American aesthetic had yet to achieve real stature, being pretty raw as we were as a people compared to the venerable cultures of the old country. We were Thomas Cole and George Catlin, and our art school had progressed to the Hudson River, but Bierstadt's overwhelming masterpieces of Western art were years in the future. We were in the act of discovering who we were. And if the events of this past week are any indication, much remains to be discovered about ourselves. For instance, the photo of the man carrying a Confederate flag in the halls of the Capitol, while a portrait of John C. Calhoun hangs in the background, is proof positive that the American people have unfinished business. But let me say about this program here. The exhibit came about in 2010. We had an empty gallery and we needed an exhibit, and the curator at the time asked me if I had any ideas for a small changing exhibition, and I went back to my office and I thought about it for about 10 minutes, and I said, yeah, I have an idea. What I want to do is I want to take the words of Moby-Dick, the words, and use them as an artifact, use them as the exhibit, and then go into the collection and see what we have that illuminates those words. So the words themselves represent a shared experience with the art. Just for your information, this is going to be a chapter in the latest edition of Melville Companion, 3rd edition, that our good friend and colleague Wynne Kelly is the editor. So this is going to be written up in brief. So this is going to be this presentation this morning is much longer. It was inspired really years and years ago by Stuart Frank's Herman Melville's Picture Gallery, which is it's a greatly influential book for my work. That book demonstrates the importance of museum collections to bolster the ideas of words alone, and how museum collections can be used to attack Melville's work in a strictly scholarly way, so that exactly what Melville was talking about, Frank explored and discovered and wrote about it in a way that is evidentiary. So that's not what this is. That's not what I'm doing today. And another thing that it's important to understand about this presentation is that there are no photos. There are going to be no photographs in this presentation, simply because there were no photographs. Daguerreotypes were being taken in the 1840s, but significantly, those daguerreotypes had painted backgrounds. So Tobias Green himself, Melville's companion in Type E, had his daguerreotype taken. But other than that, we're not going to use photographs for this. The the first whaling photos really were taken in the 1880s. Herbert Aldrich, a New Bedford Standard Times journalist, photographed whaling in the Western Arctic. And sure, John Dunmore and George Critcherson sailed to the Eastern Arctic with William Bradford in 1869 and took photographs. But we're going to be using the art of the period, and significantly, all of the whaling images are contemporaneous with Melville's experience. So, part one, slide one. Here we are looking at it. For a whale ship is my Yale College and my Harvard. Benjamin Russell painted this scene as part of the grand panorama of a whaling voyage around the world, which he and Caleb Purrington brought out into the public eye in 1848. Significantly, Russell and Melville sailed out of New Bedford Harbor in 1841. Melville on the Acushnet and Russell on board the ship Cutchoss of New Bedford. There's some interesting parallels between these men. Both suffered personal setbacks in the national financial panic of 1837. Russell losing a family fortune in the whale fishery, and Melville scrambling to find a job after his uncle's firm went bankrupt. Neither went to college. Russell having begun his business career following in his father's footsteps as a merchant, dealing in groceries and hardware and investing in whaling voyages. Melville desired a higher education, but never quite formally achieved it. Nonetheless, he read a great deal and pursued writing and teaching school before taking work as a sailor. The panorama and Moby-Dick both originated in hard times, and the bloody business of whaling served as the core inspiration for great works of art. It has been said that Melville's references to Yale and Harvard stem from a personal comparison between his own and the lives of whaleman author Francis Allen Olmsted, who left Yale University on a whaling voyage to improve his health, and who wrote Incidents of a Whaling Voyage in 1841, and Richard Henry Dana Jr., who left Harvard seeking adventure on board a hide trading vessel to the coast of California, and wrote 2 years before the mast in 1839. In any case, Moby-Dick and Purrington and Russell's grand panorama of a whaling voyage around the world were contemporaneous and derived from shared experience. Slide 2. See, this is the fun part. There go the ship. There go the ships. There is that Leviathan whom thou hast made to play therein. Thus saith the scriptures. And I chose this 16th century Dutch allegorical painting by the PDP monogrammist to illustrate the Psalms passage from the extracts, simply because it is evocative, inspiring, a fantastic marine painting, and with its ambiguous but cheerful Leviathan down here in the lower right-hand corner, suitably vague, I think, to serve as a passage from Scripture. Call me Ishmael. Ishmael, or whatever his name is, marginally better than Nemo, I suppose, narrates Moby-Dick in the retrospect. He's older than he once was, but won't tell us exactly how old. Never mind how long precisely, he says. Toward that end, the handsome sailor lad of whaleman William A. Gilpin, engraved on a sperm whale tooth in the late 1830s, represents Ishmael as he may have been, courageously leaning on the anchor of hope, the anchor of the soul. While over here on the left, Clifford Ashley's painting of an older man looking back to his youth as a sailor represents Ishmael as he may be at the time of the telling. This was a tough one. New Bedford artist R. Swain Gifford created this etching showing a rainy day at sea, which must needs suffice for our purposes of parallel visualization, as capturing the essence of the soul is indeed a tough cat to herd. But I think it does a pretty good job. Another tough cat to herd was any kind of an image of a guy following a funeral. But bringing up the rear of every funeral that I meet, sure enough, here's an R. Swain Gifford etching of a gravedigger, pretty much the last person to leave a funeral. And as good 19th century funeral procession images are really pretty hard to find, Gifford again seems to capture Ishmael's morbid musings. But here we'll go back to the panorama once again. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. I quietly take to the ship. So Benjamin Russell's view of crew members boarding a whale ship in New Bedford Harbor seems to put Melville and Ishmael directly in the moment. In this case, the ship William Hamilton outfitting for a 3-year cruise to the Indian Ocean. I always like this passage because it demonstrates a real option that when you're down and out in the 19th century, if you have nothing, if you come to the end of your rope, you can go whaling and they'll feed you, and you can get a little bit of pay. And if you're good at whaling and a sober guy and obey your orders and work hard, you could actually progress through the whale fisher. My substitute for pistol and ball. So he's telling us that he's at his end, you know, and he's about to commit suicide, but instead of doing that, he goes whaling instead. So this is a photograph of the actual entrance to the exhibition, and it was this passage. The opposite wall of this entry was hung all over with a heathenish array of monstrous clubs and spears, thickly set with glittering teeth resembling ivory saws. This was the original passage that inspired the exhibition, where the words of the text serve as artifacts as much as the objects themselves do. In its final configuration, as we see here, there are 2 of these Kiribatian sword tooth or shark tooth weapons. These weapons were not designed to kill; they were designed to injure you. And the injuries would then become infected and you would die from the infection. So that's pretty brutal warfare there. But then going down, let's see what we have here. We have an Apa-Apae coconut stalk club here from Tonga, a Totokia battle hammer club from Fiji, Gugu Dance Club, also from Fiji, and a Sali Spirit Club from Fiji as well. And this beauty down here is a spatula club from the Trobriand Islands, inlaid with lime, and an obsidian-tipped spear from the Admiralty Islands of New Guinea. So you know, we have these great collections in the Whaling Museum, and we can array them as a heathenish array of monstrous clubs and spears, indeed. And here's another of my favorites. For some of these same Quakers are the most sanguinary of all sailors and whale hunters. They are fighting Quakers. They are Quakers with a vengeance. Well, these are the guys: William Roach Sr., his son William Roach Jr., and Edmund Gardner. Quakers with a vengeance, indeed. Benjamin Russ or William Roach Sr., arguably the father of the father of American sperm whaling. You know, businessmen. You know, he was from Nantucket, and his son was also from Nantucket and came back and settled in New Bedford. And these guys rarely went to sea themselves, but nonetheless pioneered the American sperm whale fishery from their counting house windows. And Edmund Gardner himself, like Ahab, was chewed up and spit out by a sperm whale on the coast of Peru in 1816. And like the Pequod, his ship, the Union of Nantucket, was struck by a sperm whale and sunk in the Atlantic Ocean in 1807. He would later go on to enter the harbor at Honolulu in 1819, the first American whaler to visit the Hawaiian Islands. So these are indeed Quakers with a vengeance. And their portraits hung right at the entrance to the exhibition. So you just have to love Melville and what he tells us. He says, strange, nothing will content them but the extremest limit of the land. They must get just as nigh to the water as they possibly can without falling in. And here, New Bedford artist William Bradford drew just that. Here are these three guys hanging out on the wharf and as close to the water as they can get without falling in. These things are not coincidental. This is 19th century life. I love this one too. R. Swain Gifford painted this scene. It's called Moorlands, and it's probably painted out on Notion Island, one of the Elizabeth Islands. And granted, it's from the 1890s, but perhaps there's more to Melville's idea of meditation in water or wedded forever than a mere surmise. The painting itself evokes this idea. Set his feet a-going, and he will infallibly lead you to water. And so he does. Now, here's an interesting bit. Captain Ahab did not name himself. 'Twas a foolish, ignorant whim of his crazy, widowed mother, who died when he was only a 12-month-old. And yet the old squaw Tistig at Gay Head said that the name would somehow prove prophetic. Well, living in Fairhaven at the time that Melville sailed was a woman commonly known as Black Annis Sharper, Indian Annis, who was an elderly Wampanoag woman, and she lived in this stone-ender house, which is a 17th century house. This is the earliest sort of house type of Tiverton and Westport and Little Compton area, and this rare example here in Fairhaven. There's the Captain Thomas Tabor House here in Fairhaven. And Mary Tolman Hawes painted this view of this elderly Wampanoag woman. Granted, she's not the squaw Tistig, but she is in fact an elderly Wampanoag woman who lived in Fairhaven at the time that Melville sailed in 1841. Absolutely remarkable. And see, this is the fun part, that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life. William Allen Wall painted the countryside around here, and I think this is a view of the Slocum River, or maybe the Westport River. Wall also painted this view of a whaling captain's house in Acushnet, Massachusetts, right up the road. Yes, all of these brave houses and flowery gardens. Look, he's got flowery gardens. Came from the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, one and all. They were harpooned and dragged up hither from the bottom of the sea. And it's true, they were. He was probably talking more about the fabulous mansions on County Street, with James Arnold and his amazing garden. But nonetheless, William Allen Wall here, does in fact show a whaling master's house with such a garden. And here's an uncanny bit. The women of New Bedford, they bloom like their own red roses, but roses only bloom in summer, whereas the fine carnation of their cheeks is perennial as sunlight in the seventh heavens. Thomas Sully painted this portrait of Elizabeth Roach Angier, age 18. And she was William Roach Jr.'s daughter, I think. I could have that wrong. My local historians are going to come and beat me about the head and ears. But nonetheless, what a fascinating parent to have Thomas Sully's painting of this young New Bedford woman with her rosy cheeks and her general bloom On a more sober note, faith, like a jackal, feeds among the tombs, and even from these dead doubts she gathers her most vital hope. I'm not 100% sure of what that means. I think it harkens back to hope as the anchor of the soul. Hope does run through maritime cultures of the 19th century, the anchor in particular. But this memorial, you'll notice it's not a religious memorial. It is a patriotic memorial to the memory of whaleman Ebenezer W. Gifford, a mariner of the ship Phoenix of New Bedford, who was lost overboard in a gale May 1845, age 17 years, 5 months. He sleeps beneath the blue lone sea. He lies where pearls the deep. He was the beloved of all, yet none o'er his low bed may weep. And there is his brother and his sister. His brother William and his sister Betsy stand by this patriotic memorial tomb indeed. But I think it represents a lot about what the American maritime experience really meant in a maritime culture. This was people's lives. This was how they earned their livelihood. And it was a perilous business for sure, but one evidently of tremendous significance to the growth of the nation, and the people at the time were completely and fully aware of that significance. So who captured it best? The words of the 19th century American author Melville, or the brush of the 17th century Dutch marine painter Curator Peters? This is the case of one of those things that you can't unsee. The studio of Bonaventura Peters. This was attributed to Curator Peters, and it, high above the flying scud. You've got the flying scud and the dark rolling clouds. There floated a little isle of sunlight. There's a story, obviously, behind this painting. It is a typical allegorical work of the period, peculiarly elegant, misshapen, ill-proportioned, and weather-beaten portrayal of a frigate bearing the symbol of the Medici lion on its transom. It showed anchored in stormy seas off the dangerous coastline. Maria de Medici, Queen of France and regent for Louis XIII, fled France in a political intrigue and ultimately settled in Amsterdam in 1638. And this event was celebrated in the Netherlands as a diplomatic recognition of the newly independent Dutch Republic. So this, like so many of these old master Dutch marine paintings, there's more to them that meets the eye. And here's the Medici lion is traversing the stormy seas of European war, and she was kicked out of France and found a refuge in the Netherlands. And here's the sunlight, the great beam of hope for Maria de Medici. And this is just, you can't go wrong with Jonah images. I mean, God, there's dozens of them. And I just happened to choose this particular painting because it's a nice painting. So it took little imagination to collect, one of the many, many images of Jonah. However, Melville could be speaking to the people on shore, shipmates. Indeed, I do not place Jonah before you to be copied for his sin, but I do place him before you as a model for repentance. So there they are. He's talking to these guys. So here's a pairing which is a bit more straightforward, or as straightforward as anything relating to Queequeg can possibly be. A whaleman turned consul, Elisha Lyman Hamilton of New London, painted this view of whale ships at anchor in the harbor at Apia, Samoa, an island indeed, far away to the west and south. While most Sag Harbor ships were South Atlantic right whalers, others roamed far and wide across the Pacific Ocean, touching in Timor, Guam, the Bay of Islands, Chatham Island, Lord Howe Island, and throughout Polynesia. And it would be the Sag Harbor ship Superior under the command of Thomas Welcome Royes that would penetrate the Bering Strait in 1848 and opened the Western Arctic to Yankee whalers. So this is one of the few. This is a great treasure in the museum collection. A few oil paintings that we have, by a whaleman of the islands in the South Seas. And here are Queequeg-esque folk who are paddling about, with Yankee whale ships in the background. A Sag Harbor ship visited his father's bay, and Queequeg sought a passage to Christian lands. This might be one of my favorites of all. Among the many curious characters in Moby-Dick is Captain Bildad's sister, Aunt Charity. Ishmael introduces her as the ship is outfitting and reveals that she herself has invested money in the voyage. Women did sometimes invest their own money in whaling voyages, although married women could not control property in Massachusetts until the passage of the Married Women's Property Act of May 5th, 1855. The act allowed married women to own and sell real and personal property, to control their earnings, to sue, and to make wills, but not until long after Melville's whaling experience. Single women seldom made enough money to venture. Charity, as we know from the passage, has invested a score or two of well-saved dollars in her brother's ship. Charity, too, is clearly a Quaker. In this case, the pairing is very subjective on my part. The quotation from chapter 20 reads, "Chief among those who did this fetching and carrying was Captain Bildad's sister, Aunt Charity, a lean old woman of a most determined and indefatigable spirit, who seemed resolved that if she could help it, nothing should be found wanting in the Pequod." Of the many portraits of women in the collection, this one, an oil on canvas attributed to artist Frederick Mayhew, dated 1820, stood out, which to my eye matched Charity's description. This is Lucy Randall Standish, who, while not a Quaker, did, like Charity, invest her personal money in whaling voyages. She invested in four vessels over 8 voyages, and curiously did so for the same voyages where another woman, Sylvia Ann Howland, who was a Quaker, also invested. Lucy's investment came 2 years before her husband Levy's death. Laws in Massachusetts did allow wives control of assets if the husband was incapacitated. So perhaps Levy fell ill. In any case, Lucy has a fairly lean look about her, but also an unmistakable, determined spirit. She continued her whaling investments until a year before she herself passed away in 1849. So Lucy Randall Standish was a contemporary of Norman Melville, and to my mind, a great model for Aunt Charity. Now, here's a real curiosity. I initially chose this painting simply because it seemed to evoke "We gave 3 hearty cheers and blindly plunged like fate into the lone Atlantic." But there's a bigger story behind this painting, which came into the collection in 1933. It came from donated by a woman whose forebears made their millions as ship handlers and whaling investors, including investing in the bark Hope of New Bedford. This vessel was originally the brig Hope, which was a George Howland Jr. Cargo transport brig that had been re-rigged as a bark. But as a brig, it sailed to Europe with a cargo of oil and came back. And on the brig was Albert Bierstadt and his family. They emigrated from the old country to New Bedford in the brig Hope. And so for generations, scholars had said that this painting was of the Hope that brought Albert Bierstadt to New Bedford, based largely on the fact that the family who donated it had invested in the Hope. Curiously, however, this painting is less likely to be of that Hope than it is to be of the bark Hope, an English bark which sailed from Cardiff to the Cape Verde Islands in 1857 and was lost at sea. All the crew, that was carrying a cargo of coal, and all the crew were rescued. Paintings like this sort of arrangement that you see here, were insurance documentation pictures. And curiously, another of the donor's forebears was a man named Lemuel Collett, who pioneered the coal industry in New Bedford. He made the importation of coal from West Virginia and Pennsylvania into a gigantic business supporting the textile industry as whaling went into decline. So the question remains: is this the hope of the earlier investment in whaling, or is it the hope that was lost at sea carrying coal? I am inclined to the latter supposition, simply because of the structure of the painting itself. But in any event, it's a pretty great thing, and it seems to support this notion of blindly plunging like faith into the lone Atlantic. So here they are, the red-cheeked dancing girls, April and May, tripping home to the wintry, misanthropic woods. Even the barest, ruggedest, most thunder-cloven old oak will at least send forth some few green sprouts to welcome such glad-hearted visitants. So Ahab did in the end a little respond to that to the playful allurings of that girlish air. William Allen Wall painted his daughters, Annie on the right and Mary, around 1843. And this painting is one of the great uncanny examples in this presentation, and one of my favorite parallels between apparently disassociated aspects of 19th century art and literature that seem to come together and support one another. Ooh, could you ask for a better example of red-cheeked dancing girls? There they are. Pairing Ahab, of course, with the playful allurings of that girlish air seems a little far-fetched to me. But nonetheless, there they are. And it's a kind of a heartwarming idea, the red-cheeked dancing girls, April and May. William Allen Wall again painted this view. And what prompted him to paint this painting, I have no idea. Being a castaway was potentially the common lot of seafarers, and as we know, Ishmael himself was doomed to such a fate. In the whale fishery, however, being part of a wrecked whaleboat crew was part of the gig. It was not looked upon as unusual because it wasn't unusual. It could well be tragic, as boats were towed out of sight by whales and never heard from again. But this scene is not a whaleboat crew, making it all the more interesting for a New Bedford artist working through the height of the industry, but presumably represents some other specific event. In any case, it well represents Ishmael's sentiment: wet, drenched through, and shivering cold, despairing of ship or boat, we lifted up our eyes as the dawn came on. So there's the dawn, and as they despair, there's the ship. Okay, so this is the only time I cheated in the whole project. So I didn't work from the text to the painting. I saw the painting and liked it so much I wanted to put it in the show. So I Googled Venice and Moby-Dick and came up with this passage. So I did, in fact, cheat. But like most of Gifford's, R. Swain Gifford painted this scene. And like most of his work selected for the exhibit, the painting in 1880 is way too late for any sort of contemporaneous matchup with Moby-Dick. I don't care, I did it anyway. Even if it really has little to do with the Canaller's comparison between the corruption of Lima, Peru, and that of Venice in the town hose story. In any case, it matters little, as the bell tower of St. Mark's Basilica was built in 1512. So what's a couple or three more decades by 1850? So to Venice I have been there, the holy city of the blessed evangelist, St. Mark. So as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man there lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy, but encompassed by all the horrors of the half-known life. God keep thee. Push not off from that isle, that canst never return. So for a passage as freighted with metaphysical ambiguity as this, what does one choose to represent it? An island? The human soul? Sanity itself? What exactly constitutes the horrors of the half-known life? How is one to square the notion that safety and health are natural, desirable human imperatives with Ahab's notion that madness is itself the true destination of the recklessly courageous or hopelessly desperate? Thou shouldst go mad, blacksmith. Say, why dost thou not go mad? Ahab asks. One who may truly know the answers to such questions. The subject of this 1778 illustration would have been Alexander Selkirk, marooned at Juan Fernandez Island in the South Pacific by Buccaneer William Dampier in 1704 and rescued by another passing privateer, Woodes Rogers, in 1709. Robinson Crusoe, the great Robinson Crusoe, Alexander Selkirk. Push not off from that island, thou canst never return. It was a tough pairing, but I think Selkirk might be a good guy to ask that question. This is probably my favorite whaling image of all time. And in this particular instance, I did take, I did argue a bit with Stuart. Frank, he included this image in Herman Melville's picture gallery, and he interpreted the artist Cornelius Hulsart, who lost an arm in the fishery, as perhaps representing Ahab. We had many long discussions about whether it represents Ahab or whether Cornelius Hulsart Melville may have tapped Hulsart as a figure for Elijah, who may have one arm or he may have two arms. It depends on how you read the passage. But in any event, like Ahab, whaleman Cornelius Hulsart lost a limb in the Pacific Ocean sperm whale fishery. And he lost his arm while assisting the crew of the ship Enterprise of New Bedford, who lowered for whales during a gant. Upon his return home, maimed, he took to the streets of New York, selling a plagiarized pamphlet outlining the misadventures of the whale fishery. And in 1835, his cause was taken up by two prominent American painters, William Page and Thomas Birch. Page and Birch adapted Hulsart's original sketches into two prints capturing a sperm whale, seen here, and a shoal of sperm whale off the Isle of Hawaii. Now, I don't know if Melville ever saw the print capturing a sperm whale, but based upon the text description, not to mention Ahab and Elijah, the ne'er-do-well wharf rat in Nantucket, who may or may not have had two arms, it seems likely that he did know about this picture. And if you look at the action and read the words, the boat ranged along the fish's flank. When reaching far over the bow, Stubb slowly churned his long, sharp lance into the fish and kept it there, carefully churning and churning as if cautiously seeking to feel after some gold watch that the whale might have swallowed. Well, there are some great images of hunting sperm whales, but this one really seems to capture those words, I think, to my mind, extremely well. As does this beautiful scene. Melville's poetic language reminded me of a particular Chinese painting, an anonymous oil on canvas view of Hokua's garden, circa 1850. Wu Bingjing, who traded with Westerners under the name Hokua, was a wealthy merchant of Canton who made his millions trading silk and porcelain with the British. New Bedford merchant Francis S. Hathaway acquired this painting while a resident trader in China in the 1850s. In an inexplicably beautiful way, Melville's language lends itself to illustration as if he harbored a vast reservoir of mental images, which he tapped into as he wrote. The analogy encompasses his intent fully, and the Chinese artworks of the period seem to as well. The riches of the China trade have been available in American seaports since long before the first American merchant ship, the Empress of China of New York, returned from Canton in 1785. And so-called Oriental goods were both evocative and desirable. But he's talking about the islands of Java and the Straits of Java passing into the East Indies. They did not a little correspond to the central gateway opening into some vast walled empire, and considering the inexhaustible wealth of spices and silks and jewels and gold and ivory, which the 1,000 islands of that Oriental Sea are enriched. The painting itself just seems to brilliantly illuminate that idea. And this painting really demonstrates that Melville knew exactly what he was talking about. Toward evening of that day, the Pequod was torn of her canvas and bare-poled was left to fight a typhoon, which had struck her directly ahead. So as a mariner, Melville's seafaring descriptions are reliable. But how reliable are they? In this anonymous whaleman's watercolor painting of 1835, showing a bare-poled whaler, bare poles meaning all of her sails are taken in, all of her spars, she has no sails hanging, so all of her spars all the sails are furled, except for the storm trysail, set battling heavy seas and a gale of wind as any guide. Melville knew exactly what he was writing about, and you can see that perfectly in this 1835 whaleman's drawing of a ship battling a gale in the exact way that he described. So finding a lighthearted stove boat view was pretty tough, pretty challenging, as it's not the funniest thing really in the world. But "Oh jolly is the gale and a joker is the whale, a flourishing his tail. Such a funny, sporty, gamey, jesty, jokey, hokey-pokey lad is the ocean. Oh." So Joseph Bogart Hersey went whaling out of Provincetown in 1845 on the schooner Eskimo. 1843. And if a stove boat scene could be described as lighthearted, this one comes as close as it could possibly be, as the men are wet but uninjured and their boat intact. And it seemed to me to be a nice notion. There's the joker whale flourishing his tail. So that brings us to the end. In 1854, New Bedford artist Albert Van Beest drew this disturbing view of a predatory seabird hovering over a shipwrecked sailor clinging to a spar in a turbulent sea on a rocky coast. Like William Allen Wall's view of the castaway sailors, it seems to capture a common, if horrible, occurrence, whether it represents the simple coincidence of a wreck taking place near an island populated by birds, in this case, a truly horrific-looking creature combining the attributes of a buzzard, an albatross, and a bad dream, or whether perhaps the final paragraph of Moby-Dick inspired Van Beest is anyone's guess. I don't know. Tales of shipwrecked sailors clinging to spars abound, from Ulysses to Sinbad to the wreck of the Hesperus. However, it is only Melville and now Van Beest who compound that despair with an avian menace. So that's the art, and those are the words. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I know I certainly enjoyed presenting it with you, and I'll be happy to take any questions or any comments or anything that you may have to talk about. And if not, enjoy the marathon.
I'm here, Mike. I'm watching the chat. We just haven't had anything mentioned yet. So, to all of our attendees, thank you for tuning in. If you would like to chat or ask a question with Mike, please utilize the chat feature. And you can find that by hovering your cursor at the bottom or top of your screen, wherever your toolbar lies, clicking chat, and then you can ask away. Mike, we have one from Wynn
Oh,
Kelly. She said, in Loomings, Herman Melville features an artist of the Saco. My question is more of an observation. Oh, she's still typing. Here it is. My question is more of an observation. What do you think of his attitudes to artists?
What do I think of Melville's attitude to artists? Well, it depends on the artist, doesn't it? I mean, he likes some of them a lot, and he doesn't like other ones. He didn't like Cuvier's illustration at all, but he really did love Garner, and so I think that he understands that art and whaling are very important. And if we go back to this picture, um, I think there's more to it than meets the eye, and I think that some of this art may well have influenced his ideas and his works. That's what I think.
She also clarified after and said, not just the works, but artists themselves.
I really don't know. What do you think, Lynn?
She might continue to type. She said, I am fascinated. And we do have another question. It's from Bob Wallace. What was the windmill like object next to Whaleman's garden outside New
Yeah, it
Bedford?
was a water pump.
Awesome. Carl Bilak mentioned very well done, a great addition to the marathon. Elizabeth F., thank you for this wonderful talk. I did miss the beginning 10 minutes. Will it be available later online? Yes, it will be available. It just won't be available for probably a week or two, but we will post it to the New Bedford Whaling Museum's YouTube channel once we have post-produced it. Vanessa Gralton, thank you for a great talk, Mike. Do you think there would be any chance that Melville could ever have met William Bradford, given that they were both living in New York City in the late 1800s?
Ooh. Hmm. You know, Vanessa, this gets back to the same question that Bob Wallace kicked around a few years ago. Did Melville see the panorama when it was in Boston? I don't know. And it might also get back to Wynn's earlier question: what did Melville think of artists? Neither of them really seem. Bradford, in particular, seems sort of outside Melville's ken. I mean, it doesn't. I don't see. Apart from that one pencil sketch, I don't really see. I never really drew anything from Bradford that seemed to my mind to align with Melville's aesthetic or his notions. If you think about a painting or is it like this one, that painting aligns with Melville's aesthetic. Set his feet a going, and he will infallibly lead you to water. I mean, it's like Arsene Gifford, was inspired in a similar way that Melville may have been inspired. I don't really get that really with Bradford, but boy, you sure do with Benjamin Russell. I mean, those guys they line up, in many ways, especially with the whaling, with the whaling scenes and the way the voyage progresses. I think that there's a lot of potential symbiotic overlap there.
Great. We have another question. It's from Caroline Hack. Great talk. Melville's book inspired artists and continues to do so. What do you think it is about the book that continues to inspire creative responses?
I I think that they're parallel notions. It's art. The book itself is art. The language is poetic. Um, I'm not an artist, so I can't speak to what inspiration might be found. You might want to ask that question of Peter Michael Martin. He might even be on the program today. I don't know. He might even be in the audience. But he drew tremendous inspiration from Moby-Dick, and so did Matt Kish. Um, and the I think that the images are evocative that Melville writes, and they capture the imagination. And artists live by having their imaginations captured. So I think that might be part of it.
Great. We have a question from Amanda Lawrence. Is the 17th century stone house from the earlier painting still standing?
No, the ruins are there, and you can go there, but it's not.
Where was that, Mike?
It's on North Main Street.
Okay.
It's there's a sign on the right, and oh doggone it, I'm missing my local history. It's a very famous place. The original, Vanessa, you might know this. I don't know who was the original founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church lived in that on that land, lived in that place. I don't think the house is still there, but I know the ruins are still there. So you can go there. I mean, you can go there. There's there's an interpretive site, very nicely done, talking about the Seventh-day Adventist.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. We have one from Mary Kay Birdcott Edwards.
Sure.
She said, Mike, your presentation was awesome. I love all your images. Thank you. Will you please explain a little further about Elijah and his one or two arms?
Well, he says he clapped. He says that Elijah says Ahab will be all right when this left arm of mine is all right. Right? Isn't that what he says? And then later he claps a hand on both our shoulders. And so actually, I got to tell you something. My sister and I had a long conversation about this too. She's reading at 11 o'clock. So I'm going to jump off here by 11 o'clock because I want to check out my sister reading. But at any rate, we had a big conversation about that, and she came down on him having two arms because of this passage about clapping his hand on both our shoulders. But I thought that question, Ahab will be all right when this left arm of mine is all right, just smacked me, saying Hulsart was missing an arm. Is Elijah missing an arm? And then he goes off into his typical Melvillian ambiguity where you can't get to the bottom of the question. Does that? What do you think, Mary Kay?
So far, she said thank you with 4 exclamation points. So I think you may have gotten it. And then Vanessa and Bob Wallace mentioned Joseph Bates to answer the question from before.
Right. Yep, Joseph Bates. Thank you both very much.
So I think this is coming to the end of our program. So that way Mike can hop off and watch his sister at 11. For those of you who have been following along with the marathon, you may have noticed that if you've X'd out of your browser and you go back into the browser with the video recording, you will notice that it brings you back to the beginning of the marathon. We were able this year to provide 2 options. One was for you to start right at 11:30 yesterday and follow straight through with us as you would from a live stream, or you have the leisure to pause, take a break, X out of it, go back in, fast forward, rewind. So if you are looking to be on the same chapter that we are on currently, we are on chapter 127. So if you did X out of your browser and you need to go back, you will just want to use the toggle at the bottom to fast forward to reach 127, around 128 shortly. But that is all that I have. Mike, do you have any final closing remarks?
No, thank you everybody for tuning in. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Again, this will be available within the next week or so on our YouTube channel once we post-produce the recording. Have a great day, and thanks for joining us for the Moby-Dick Marathon.